on France 24. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is The World This Week. We're in the company of Craig Kapitas of Quartz in the Atlantic, Gregory Viscusi of Bloomberg News, Vivian Walt of Time Magazine, and from Radio France International, Angela Diffley. His much-delayed speech finally came. David Cameron promising an up-down referendum on the UK's position in Europe by 2017 if he's re-elected.
I never want us to pull up the drawbridge and retreat from the world. I am not a British isolationist, but I do want a better deal for Britain. But not just a better deal for Britain, I want a better deal for Europe too.
Putting it to the voters, making him popular this week inside his own Conservative Party. However, lighting the referendum fuse not to the liking of leaders in Brussels.
He's a real politician, David Cameron, to suggest to the citizens, if you re-elect me in 2015, you will get a referendum. This has nothing to do with the referendum, but a lot with the next election. This is neither meaningful nor acceptable.
Neither meaningful nor acceptable. Angela Diffley.
No, I disagree with that. I think that everyone has focused on the fact that Cameron has done this because he is facing a growing threat from UKIP, the UK Independence Party, which openly says we want to get out of Europe. But I think that rather misses the point, which is that they have such an amount of support because there is a growing disenchantment with the European Union in Britain. So I think, in a sense, it has to be addressed at some point. The timing is quite good. I mean, he can't do it sooner because Nick Clegg, with whom he's in a coalition, is very pro-European. He has waited until the euro crisis has abated somewhat, not too much exploiting the Greek situation. The timing is okay. He has an awful lot of work to do to persuade the British people because the tabloid press, significantly under Rupert Murdoch, which is ferociously anti-European or anti-European Union, has done an excellent job in putting one side of the case for many, many years. So he's going to have a lot of work trying to explain to the British people what the benefits of the European Union are, and he believes there are many. I think where the problems are, I also think the questions he raised in his speech about reforming the bureaucracy and the flabbiness of the EU and the monstrous overspending, that it's time somebody took that on. The enormous problem is that he appeared to be suggesting that Britain, which has no intention ever of joining the Eurozone, should renegotiate everything in such a way that it has all the advantages of not being in the Eurozone, and everyone else should give way. And I simply, that is not palatable. It was all about more advantages for Britain, more benefits for Britain, to the disadvantage of the other 26. No one's going to buy that. Also, the timetable doesn't work with German elections, all that stuff.
Still, when you hold a referendum and David Cameron says he's for staying in the European Union, you never know what the outcome's going to be.
Well, Mr. Cameron's exhibition is a wonderful illustration of Disraeli's observation that the Conservative Party is nothing but organized hypocrisy. This is a political ploy on Cameron's behalf. Of course, the British are entitled to a referendum. Again, it's how one goes about doing things. I think it's the way in which he said it, which was antagonizing towards Europe. This is one of the reasons why
well, there's not any way of saying it without.
Well, he can be a very antagonizing little man, and I think this was a wonderful example of that. It obviously is political. If you're going to do this, have the referendum tomorrow. Democracies can have referendums. Exactly. There's nothing wrong with that, but everyone seems to let him go along with this.
It seems that, from a pro-European point of view, and he's an insipid pro-European, but he doesn't want Britain
what
fully
Mrs.
out.
Thatcher called wet.
If you did it now, Britain would say no. So that's a pro-European argument for not doing it now.
Well, have the referendum. They're trying to choose their time. If they're going to have a referendum now.
Why? Then everyone would say no, and he doesn't want that.
Well, then that's just the way it is. I mean, the public would like to have, I'm sure, the referendum now. This is what I mean. Cameron is playing politics with this.
He's a politician, and I don't think the public do necessarily. I think actually, in terms of the domestic audience, it's been quite well received. Everybody can see the political imperatives for him, but he's a politician.
But do you honestly?
So what?
What's been well received? Is it the idea of a referendum, or is it the idea of being able to leave the EU?
It's the idea of staging it like that has been a sort of a difficult but reasonably well accepted compromise.
I must ask,
it has
though,
to be addressed at some point.
Does anyone actually believe that Cameron and the EU over the next couple of years until this referendum can actually work out a plan that will magically allow the British to stay? We want to stay in the EU.
Yes,
You do.
I think that an awful lot of misrepresentation by the tabloid press, and I do think that the Murdoch press is well known. They're anti-European Union, and they have the biggest circulation their newspapers do in Britain. And I do think they have pushed their case, which is anti-European Union. That's fine, but there was no one pushing the other side. And I think a lot of politicians in Britain have been quite lazy about doing that. It's sometimes suited them to blame Europe. There's a lot of willful confusion as well on the part of the tabloid press. Many of the things which annoy Britain and the British people a lot are to do with the European Court of Human Rights, which is not a European Union institution. So there's a lot of confusion which is exploited. And with, if there's time for a proper debate and a proper information exercise, let's see.
Vivian Wall.
Well, it seems like, I agree with Craig, it seems like a totally political ploy, but it's also a huge political gamble. I mean, when you have a referendum and the referendum doesn't go your way, you've pretty much voted yourself out of power, which he won't do because he's going to do it after the elections.
Which is not guaranteed of winning.
Which is not guaranteed of winning. But the fact is that with 5 years or 4 years, shall we say, until a referendum, I find it very hard to believe that the British would not come around to the conclusion that it's better to stay in the European Union than to leave it. Of course, it's always easier and better to leave the status quo as it is than to completely shake it up and, who on earth knows what kind of unintended consequences you're going to cause.
But you can already see a bit more information now. People have woken up on the pro-European side. They're saying, for a start, the special relationship with the United States is largely based on the fact that Britain is a useful bridge for the US into the European Union. If Britain moves
The White
out
House
of the
put out a
European
statement
Union,
saying that it was for the Britain staying in the EU.
Exactly.
By the way, Cameron's pledge sending a strong case of the jitters the way of British business leaders, who this week just happened to be, for some of them, in Davos at the World Economic Forum. They feel the Prime Minister has just blown a cloud of uncertainty over investment in their country.
The truth is, he has got himself on a slippery slope.
But of course, not everybody in Davos is displeased with Cameron's move.
The Prime Minister's speech was bang on the money. I think it was the right thing to say. It's too long since the British people have been consulted. It's the right thing for Europe, because you cannot go on with the Brits. With the Brits endlessly being the backbone.
Vive la Grande-Bretagne, vive l'Europe.
Voilà, c'est ça.
Les deux.
Long live Great Britain, long live Europe, says Christine Lagarde. Again, they may not be laughing after the votes are counted, though.
I mean, what you said about British public opinion being confused about a lot of things. There's another thing you said they're confused between the Council of Europe and the European Union. They're also very confused about what sort of an offer they would get if they left the EU. There seems to be this thinking, well, we'll still be part of the common market. Well, there's a big difference between the common market and a single market. And, a common market just means that there's duty-free entry, which is how the EU originally began. But right now there's a single market, which means that there's the same set of rules everywhere, which exists for a good reason, because only that way can goods and services really move freely within the zone, and the British would be outside of that. So this idea that the British can get that they can just cherry pick, it's not on the table. It's not an offer.
I think that's the biggest flaw in the whole project. But I do think they need to explain. Cameron, who says he's for Britain staying in the EU, need to explain to people, if we pull out, then we would have to renegotiate trade agreements from a position of weakness with every country around the world. I don't think British people have realised what it entails, and once they do, I think there is a greater chance of them saying,
if people are,
I think there will be sort of an educational process will happen in Britain, but it might be a healthy thing, all this, and then it probably will also force the EU to really think about what it wants to do. And above all, you've got the problem that you've got a group within the EU that belong to the euro. Because of the recent crisis, they've got to move towards a closer union, a tighter union, which then raises a whole issue about what's their relationship with those people that are in the EU but not part of the euro. So it's actually a healthy debate for Europe to have, and it's a debate that's going to take time. So it's probably a good thing that they're not rushing to having a referendum tomorrow.
Speaking of having a debate about Europe and about Britain, there's no points for guessing what the founder of the Fifth Republic and the German Chancellor of his day would have thought of Cameron's move. France and Germany celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Élysée Treaty that forever sealed France's ties to Germany. Celebrations included this.
De jeunes Allemands qui ont aussi vieilli depuis s'inquiètent quand notre relation n'est pas au niveau.
Confronté aujourd'hui à un terroriste.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Yes, you saw the French foreign minister nodding off a little bit there in the Reichstag.
A few journalists were too.
Oh dear, it's the
let you
evening
in on.
concert and Angela Merkel's falling asleep at the Philharmonic. It was a long day for them, or what was the story behind that, Gregory Viscusi?
I mean, as Wim Wenders, the movie director who came to a meeting with Merkel and Hollande early in the morning, he said after 50 years of any marriage, there's a bit of indifference, and that's just kind of normal. And there is just a lack of sort of liveliness in that relationship right now.
They need a Viagra moment?
They need a Viagra moment. They definitely need a Viagra moment.
In The Economist, Schrank's cartoon accompanying a column on what it labels an odd couple that's lost its passion but seems locked in a relationship where the two are destined to stick together.
Well, Hollande said something true, which he said that, when France and Germany get on too well, all the other countries in Europe think that it's at their expense. But when France and Germany don't get on well, all the other countries in Europe realize that it's their loss.
Yeah.
It's at their expense. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a cliche to say, oh, they're condemned to be together. It's a cliche, but like most cliches, there's a grain of truth in it.
And most of those Franco-German relationships, Sarkozy and Merkel didn't get on that well in the beginning. And most of them start off fairly badly. And each time, one half of the couple thinks, I'll look around and maybe think about an alliance with London or play the field or Italy. They end up turning back. It's the only relationship.
Well, they should have had the Rolling Stones play at this get-together. I mean, this shows how old and hidebound and hoary they all are. Did you see? Seriously, if the future of Europe is the youth, as everyone keeps saying, I didn't see any of it at this meeting. I saw a lot of old people.
All right.
And a lot of old music.
All right, so for putting the pizzazz back in that relationship,
absolutely,
Craig Capita suggests the Rolling Stones. There is a future. That's the name of the Israeli party that has proved to be the surprise upstart of this week's snap general election. The secular and centrist Yesh Atid polling a surprise second with at its head a popular ex-TV talk show host.
Israelis today said no to a politics of fear and hatred. No to the option that we will split into sections, tribes or groups divided by interests. And they said no to extremism and anti-democracy.
Vivian Walt, surprise.
The surprise is it hasn't happened before, I think. I mean, at last, the Israelis have something other than the stale, old, paralyzed politics that they've been stuck in for, I don't know how long, generations. I mean, we've had a vicious cycle of just going nowhere. It's really amazing. The whole of the rest of the world has moved on, including the Arab world, and they are stuck talking the same narrative.
But it should be pointed out that even though Netanyahu's coalition lost 11 seats, he's still in the driver's seat to form a government, and he's still on message.
The government will form will be based on 5 main principles. Firstly, security to face the challenges posed against us. The first challenge remains the same, to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
All right, we'll spare you the 4 other points, but you saw what's top of the list there, Craig Capitas.
Right, and at the same time, as they always do, bless their hearts, they ship Shimon Peres to Davos to say everything, to give his usual rabbinical homily. Vivian's right. This is a terrific thing that's happened. There might be some traction. Again, it's a question of people who are out of touch running governments. And I think it's fantastic that there's someone there now who might be able to kick up some dust and reach some kind of conclusion. This is an extremely hopeful sign.
But kick on dust on what fronts? I mean, the lesson I took from this is that most Israelis are more concerned about the cost of cottage cheese than they are about the occupation of the West Bank. I mean, that was very much his...
Yeah.
Well, one key thing...
Yeah.
The ultra-Orthodox who are exempt from military service and who are the most gung-ho and the most hawkish about military action, I think if their sons were involved in the army, they might think differently.
Precisely.
It's a small detail, but it could have big consequences.
I mean, in terms of the cost of living, I mean, the cost of the occupation is enormous to the Israeli government. And of course, Israel's economy is very dynamic. It has tremendous high-tech innovation and so on. But the occupation is a continual economic drain.
But that's not what the center ran its campaign on. In fact, they were almost mum on issues of the occupation.
But I think
it was all about
people,
it was about the cost of living, which I understand. I totally understand that Israelis, that for most Israelis, that's the
electorate is looking towards him as the person who might be whether he is saying it now. He is the touchstone for a possible new future. Whether it transpires or not, of course, remains to be seen.
But even he's pretty ambivalent on a lot of issues. I mean, he wants to keep all the main settlement blocks within Israel. I mean, I wouldn't call him, he's certainly not a peace now
type. The jury's
type.
still out, and the government, by the way, hasn't yet been formed, so it's something that we'll watch as well. Gregory Viscusi, I want to thank you. I want to thank Angela Diffley, Vivian Walt, and Craig Capitas. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.